everyone, welcome to this video tutorial for our ribbed bow tie. So we hope you enjoy this tutorial. Please like, share and subscribe, and hope to catch you soon. Okay Melba, off you go. Good girl, thank you. Okay, so for this project you'll need some yarn. I'm going to use this scrap yarn that I've got here in a vibrant yellow colour. I think it's really beautiful, looks great as a bow tie. So this one is a 80% acrylic, 20% wool yarn, and it works up well with my 4mm crochet hook. So if you want the approximate dimensions that I'm making here for my bow tie, find a yarn that recommends a 4mm crochet hook. You'll need a button. Now your button shouldn't be more than about 1.2 centimeters in diameter. Probably around the 1 centimeter mark would be perfect, just to accommodate the buttonhole that we'll be making on this project. You'll need some darning needles. Now you'll need one to weave in your end with a larger eye, and then you'll need a finer one to sew on your button with. So just making sure that the needle that you've got fits through the eye on your button. You'll need some scissors, of course, to snip off your ends, and you'll need a tape measure to measure the circumference of your cat's neck, as well as the length of the neckband that you're making. Okay, so the techniques you'll need to know to create this bow tie, and bearing in mind it's very beginner friendly, you can work this up really quickly within an hour or two, obviously depending on your crochet ability, but you can work this up really quickly, and it uses just a small amount of yarn, so it's a great scrap yarn project. So the techniques you'll need to know are how to slip knot onto your hook, how to create a chain, how to single crochet in the third loop of your chain, and I will run through that with you when we get to it. You'll need to know how to single crochet in the back loop only to create this ribbed effect. You'll need to know how to sew on your button. You'll need to know how to weave in ends. And then you'll need to know how to sew the bow tie to the neckband. And I'll run through all of those techniques with you. I'm just assuming that you know how to do the basic techniques like slip knot onto your hook and single crochet. So please run through those if you're not sure, or if you're an absolute beginner. Just perhaps check out a YouTube video on those techniques. And otherwise, it's, super easy and fun project. Okay, I just wanted to drop in a couple of notes about sizing here before we get started with the actual crochet. So I've got two bow ties that I've previously made up here. This one here is a large, and the dimensions come out at approximately 12 centimeters by 5 centimeters. This one here is a medium, and it comes out at around 10 to 11 centimeters wide and around 4 to 4.5 centimeters high. The small size comes out at about 9 to 10 centimeters wide and 4.5, about the same as the medium size high. So I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. So the sizing obviously will also depend on the exact yarn that you're using, so there'll be a little bit of leeway in the sizing, so please just use this as a guide. The other thing that I'll mention just quickly about sizing here, although I'll talk to it more later, is this neckband is fully customizable to the size of your cat's neck circumference. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. And the last quick thing I'll mention here is that you'll get to decide whether you'll make this rounder look bow tie, or like this one here where it's more of a squared off look bow tie. Okay, and we'll talk about that later when we get to this border area here. Okay, so take your yarn and slip knot onto your hook, however you do that. And then if you're making a small sized bow like I am today, you'll chain 16, 2, 3, 14, 15 and 16. So if you're making small, like I said, chain 16. If you're making a medium, chain 18. And if you're making a small sized bow, chain 20. Okay, so whatever size you're making, we'll move on to row 1. So chain 1 as a turning chain, and then we're going to work into, like I said before, this third loop of the chain. So if you have a look at the front of your chain, you've got all these little V's. That's Melba underneath my table. So if you look at the front of your chain, you've got all these little V's. And then if you turn your chain over, you've got this, what I call the third loop. Okay, so we're going to work into those third loops. So find the second chain from your hook and insert a single crochet into that third loop. And then into the next third loop. So you're going to do this all the way down for row 1. Melba, I think she's off camera, but she's playing with my table. Okay, so in row 1, single crochet all the way along into that third loop. Oops, I'm a bit distracted by Melba, beg your pardon. Okay, so single crochet in each third loop all the way down to the end of your row. So I'll meet you at the end of row 1. Okay, so I'm just inserting my last 2 single crochets in my row 1. So working into that third loop. So this is the last one here. Okay. And so that's row 1 done. So we'll move on to row 2. So chain 1 for your turning chain. And then in this first stitch, just place a normal single crochet. And then in the next stitch, find the back loop. So you've got 2 loops in your stitch. Find the back loop, the one that's furthest away from you. Insert your hook and put a single crochet. Now we're going to single crochet in, oh excuse me, that's Melba again, in the back loop only, all the way along until the end of row 2. And at the beginning and end of each row, the stitch will go through both loops, and that's just to make the edges a little bit more sturdy. So in the first and last stitch, place your single crochet through both loops, and then all the stitches in between, place them into the back loop only. So we're only working with single crochets in this project. So just a single crochet all the way along your row in the back loop only, except for the first and last stitches. So I'll meet you at the end of row 2. Okay, so I'm just working my last single crochet into my second to last stitch, and then I've got my last single crochet there into both loops of the last stitch. Okay, so I've completed row 2. So you can start to see this ribbed effect coming into the pattern now. So what we're going to do is just repeat row 2. So chain 1. Now we'll repeat row 2 for, if you're making a small or a medium, you will repeat row 2 for 3 more rows. So 5 rows. Okay? Or it's 5 rows in total. So repeating row 2 for 3 more rows. If you're making a large, extend that to 1 more row, so row to row 6. Okay, so go ahead and complete your next few rows. So it'll be 3 more rows if you're making a small or a medium, and 4 more rows if you're making a large. So just the same, working in those single crochets into the back loop only. And that just gives us the ribbed effect that we're looking for on the the bow tie. So keep going, and I'll meet you at the end because I'm making a small, I'll be going to row 5. So I'll meet you at the end of either your row 5 or your row 6. Okay, so I'm just finishing off my row 5. That's my last single crochet in the back loop, and then a single crochet in the last stitch. Okay, so that's the main part of my bow done. Now we're going to add a single crochet border just to tidy up these edges. Now this is the point where you'll need to decide if you want to make the rounded edge version that I spoke about at the beginning, or the squarer edge version. Okay, so make that decision, and I'm going to make a squarer edge version. So single crochet back into that same stitch that you just single crocheted into, whether you're making the rounded or the square. And then you just place a single crochet along this edge, approximately 1 in the top of each row, moving along. And then once you get to the corner, if you're making a squared off edge, you'll place 2 single crochets into that corner. And if you're making a rounded edge, you'll just place 1. Okay, so I'm making a squared edge, so I'm going to place 2. And then move along and place 1 single crochet. So this will be your chain edge. So place, it'll be a little bit tighter to get your hook into. But place 1 single crochet all the way along that chain edge. So it'll because we worked into the 3rd loop, it'll kind of look like a stitch, but it'll just be a little bit tighter than usual. So all the way around. So what you'll do from here is you'll keep going single crochet in each stitch all the way around. When you come around here and you place a single crochet at the top of each row on this other short edge, you'll start to work in, as an option, you'll start to work in your tail. If you don't want to do that and you just want to work it in at the end, that's also fine. And then you'll move all the way along and come back to where you started. So I'll meet you just before the end around here. So this is where I started here, so I'll meet you back just before where I started. Okay, so just to come back here for a quick reminder, is just to remind you, if you're making that squared off edge, you place 2 single crochet in each corner. So I'm just at that corner there now, and I'm going to start to work in my tail end. So working those single crochets, approximately 1 in the top of each row, just evenly spaced along that short edge. And of course, if you were making just the rounded version, you'd just place that 1 single crochet. So I'm back at this corner here, so I'll be placing my 2 single crochets in the corner. And for me, I think that's enough of working in my end. So I'm going to snip off, oops, I'm going to snip off that tail end now. And then I'm going to continue along this long edge, and I'll meet you, like I said, back here. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end of my row. Now, as before, if you're making the squared off version, you'll place a 3rd single crochet in that corner stitch. Okay, if you're making the rounded version, you'll stop because you've already placed your single crochet in the corner there. Okay, so one technique that I didn't mention that you'll need to know at the beginning, I forgot to mention it, but it's making this invisible stitch to finish off your work, so it's nice and neat. So don't yarn over and pull through like you often would to end a project. Just pull out a length of yarn and snip off your end. And then we're going to finish this off so you can't tell where the ending is. So take your large darning needle and thread your end through the eye. Oops. And then we're going to create this invisible stitch, so you can't see where your ending is. So to do that, so find your first stitch in the round that we made around the edge, the first one here, and you've got your last one here. So we're basically just sewing a stitch between these two. So find that first stitch and go under both loops of that first stitch. Pull your yarn through. Now here's where you've got to be careful not to pull too tight. So you want to pull only as tightly as the stitches around it. Okay, and then you'll come in. So this was the last stitch I did. You want to go down into the center of that last stitch. Okay, so basically you've just sewn a stitch, and then you'll just make sure you don't pull it too tight. Okay, so you'll just push through, make sure your yarn is through on the back side, and then we're going to just weave in this end into the back. So just weave it through your stitches in the back. So what I would do is I would go along once, and then I will come back again. Just don't double back where you've just come from, so that will mean that it'll come undone, but just go backwards and forwards 2 or 3 times. Make that nice and secure in the back there. And I think we'll say that that's okay. And then snip off your excess. So that's the main rectangle of your bow done. So we're going to now turn this rectangle into a bow. So once again, take your large darning needle and your yarn, thread your needle, and then we're going to find the halfway point. So fold your bow in half with the front side facing you. Fold it in half, so you're on the back side here, and then you're just going to weave. So actually, when you have thread your needle, just make sure that you pull through two reasonably long tails, okay? Because you're going to use that to sew on your bow to the back of your to the band, to the neckband. So you want 2 tails, let's say around 20 to 30 centimeters long, and you can snip that off now. And then we're going to create this bow. So what you'll do is you'll work your yarn through the center of the rectangle, so all the way through. Okay, and then pull on one of those tails just to bring it through, and then even it up. So you can take off your yarn, your needle off the yarn. So you've pulled one of those tails through and you've centered it. So I'm ended up with this here. And then what you'll do is you'll pull these tight, so you'll kind of drawstring them together. And then you'll start winding. So hold that at the back. And actually what you can do at this point here is probably a good idea. Just tie a knot in the back here. Okay. And then you'll just a single knot, and then you'll start winding. So take one of your tail ends and start winding around in one direction, and then take your other tail end and start winding in the opposite direction until you've got your bow shaped as you want it to be. So that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to tie my tail ends at the back here. So I'm just going to do a double knot, and that's my bow finished. Okay, so we're going to move on to making the neckband. Okay, so we're moving on to the neckband. So slip knot onto your hook and chain 3. So at this point, or probably before, you will need to measure the circumference of your cat's neck. So you measure relatively snugly on this tutorial. You don't need to leave any extra. So for example, Melba's neck is around 24 centimeters. I'm going to work pretty much exactly to that length. So we add an extra border which allows a little bit of extra leeway in the sizing, so you don't need to account for that now. So you've chained your 3, and then in the second chain from the hook, place a single crochet and then 1 in that last stitch. Now this band is just single crochet band, so super easy. Chain 1, Melba again. She's usually asleep when I'm filming, but not today. Chain 1, moving on to row 2, place 1 single crochet in each of your 2 stitches, and then you're just going to continue. Go. You're just going to continue doing that, chaining 1, turning, and 1 single crochet in each of your 2 stitches until you reach the length that you've measured. So for Melba, I'm going to go to 24 centimeters, but you'll go to whatever is the length that corresponds to your cat's neck circumference. So I'll see you once I've reached my 24 centimeters. Okay, so I'm very close to my 24 centimeters here for Melba. So you'll be working to whichever length corresponds to your cat's neck circumference. So just finish off these last couple of rows. Okay, and I'll just double check the length that I've got there. So yeah, pretty much exactly 24. Okay, so we're going to do the same as we did with the bow. We're going to create this single crochet border edge, and with it we're going to create the buttonhole. Okay, so place a single crochet back into that same last stitch, and then all the way along your border, approximately 1 in the top of each row, all the way around. So we're just working this single crochet border as we did for the bow, all the way around. Go down your long edge. So I'll meet you, we're going down this first long edge here, so I'll meet you here. We're going to create our buttonhole. Now if your tail end is on that edge, just stop here and weave it in. That will be easiest with you. Because mine's on the other side, I'm going to actually work it in when I do the other side. But if it's on this corner that you're heading towards, you're going to have to weave it in now. Okay, we're going to create the buttonhole at this end. So keep working down that first edge, and I'll meet you down at the bottom of this edge. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end of my first edge. So place your last single crochet in that edge there. And now we're going to make a chain to create the buttonhole. So depending on the size of your button, now I recommended at the beginning that your button is no bigger than about 12 millimeters or 1.2 centimeters. If you do have a larger button, if you don't have a button small enough, then you could chain extra at this point. But I'm going to get you to chain 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to attach onto this opposite corner. So if you want to make a slightly bigger buttonhole, you'll chain perhaps one extra. Okay, and then like I mentioned before, if your tail is on this side, you can start to work it in as you work along this second long edge. Okay, so you've created your buttonhole, and at this point you can just make sure that your button fits through your hole. Oh yes, there's my button. Okay, so just make sure that it fits through. Actually, that wasn't my button. I think Melba might have stolen my button. I'll find my button. Anyway, my button was about that size. I had a blue button that I'm going to use. But anyway, let's continue along. So keep going along this long edge. Just one single crochet in the top of each row. And if you're working in your tail, just work in enough so it's nice and secure. And I think for me that will do. So I'll just snip off that tail end, and then I'm going to keep going until I get back to my top edge. So I'll meet you once you're back at this beginning point here. Okay, so I'm just finishing up my last couple of stitches on this second long edge, and then once again we'll do that invisible finish. So just pull through a length of your yarn. So don't yarn over. Okay, when you do that, take your, just to run through it quickly again, take your large darning needle and so locate your last stitch, your first stitch, place your needle under both loops in that first stitch, pull through to approximately the tightness or the tension as your stitches around it. Go down through the center of the last stitch and then weave in your end into the back of your neckband. Okay, so just make sure that's nice and secure. Go back 2 or 3 times as you did for your main bow and snip off your end. Okay, so at this point here, just check this around your cat and make sure that it's about the right length. And actually I should have mentioned that before we finished off the band. So, or maybe I did, I don't recall. But anyway, just double check here, make sure that it's the right size for your cat. And we're going to sew on the button. Okay, so I found my blue button that Melba was playing with. Okay, so to sew on your button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split my yarn and I'm going to use that to sew on my button. Now if you just want to use thread, or if your yarn you don't need to split it, that's also fine. But for my little button I'm going to have to split, otherwise I won't be able to sew it on with the full thickness of the yarn. So just split that down, get a good length of it, and then I'll take my small needle and I will thread my smaller needle with that end, and then it's just as simple as sewing on a button. Oops, that's going to take me a moment to thread. Okay, so I've got that threaded off camera. So take your button, and so obviously on the opposite end to the buttonhole, and you'll sew your button right up against the edge, because remembering that you've measured snugly, you'll want to get that button right up just underneath the border there. So my button's got 4 holes, so I'm just going to sew it in. So this is how I tend to do it. I tend to sew like this, but just, you know, whatever technique you've got for sewing on your buttons. You might only have a 2-hole button, so it might be fine just to use one of your tails. So that's one of them done, and then I'm going to thread my needle with my other tail and do the other 2 holes in my button. Okay, so I'm just using my second tail on the other 2 holes of this 4-hole button. Okay, so once it's secure there, what I just do is I take these 2 tail ends and I tie a knot in the back, double knot in the back. And then I take my larger darning needle again to weave in these ends. I just bring them back together. Might need to snip off some of the end, and then I just use my larger darning needle to weave in these ends into the back here. Now what we could have done is we could have used our end to sew on our button, but I haven't done that in this case. I've just woven in my ends and then split my yarn and sewn it on. But that's certainly an option. If you're like me and you don't really like weaving in ends, then you could have done that as a 2-in-1. But for today, we've done it this way. So that's our band finished. So we've got our band, and now we've got our bow to sew on. Okay, so you want to find the center of your band and thread your needle, your large darning needle, with one of your ends. So what I tend to do when I'm sewing this is I sew one down one side and the other tail in the back here down the other side. So I'll show you what I mean. So thread your needle. So finding that center point, what I tend to do is just focus with one of the tails. I focus on one side of the bow. So I just go up and down on this side of the bow for this tail. So just make sure that you're sewing it on nice and straight. So come up and through there. So I'm just coming up just to the side of the center there, and then I'll go back down, and I'll do that a couple of times on each side so it's nice and secure. So like I said, just make sure that your bow is nice and straight as you're sewing it on, and then go down one more time there. Oops. And then I'll thread, so always finish on the bottom side. So then I'll thread my needle with my other tail. And I'll do the same thing on this side. So just coming down through the band and then back up, coming up on the other side and then back through. Oops. And then I'll just finish that quickly off camera, and I'll be back to show you how we'll finish off. Okay, so I've just finished off sewing on my bow. Now actually what I'll do, and what I should have done, is try to finish with both of your tail ends right next to each other. So I'll just weave in that one across so I'm close to this other tail end. And then we're going to tie a double knot in the back there with the two tail ends. So it's nice and secure. So tie that knot. And then it's just a matter of just weaving in these ends into the back here. So once again, thread your needle and then just weave each of your tail ends into the back of the band. And from there you're done. So I'll finish doing this off camera, just weaving in my two ends, and I'll come back to finish off with you. Okay, so I've woven both of my ends into the back of my band, and I'm just snipping off the excess there. And there's your bow tie. So as always, I'd love to see photos of your cat wearing his or her bow tie. So please either send those along via email to catventurous.community@gmail.com, or you can tag us on social media at catventurous.crochet. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Apologies for Melba being a little bit disruptive and distracting me, but I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share and subscribe. Comment below, give me a thumbs up, and also you can ring the notification bell if you'd like to see our weekly uploads. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this tutorial and catch you soon. Sleepy Melba. Sleepy Melba. Hey, this nice bow tie. Hey, hey. Hi everyone, Charlotte and Melba here. Melba looking very grumpy. Charlotte and Melba here. Welcome to our video tutorial for this ribbed bow tie. If you like this tutorial, please like, share and subscribe, and hope to catch you soon. Bye. Hey baby. Hey baby.